What's up, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Sandhill Road. In this episode, I'm joined by Caroline Winnett, who's the Executive Director at UC Berkeley's own incubator and accelerator program, SkyDeck.
You should come to SkyDeck because you dream big. You want to change the world. You're not doing this as a side hustle, and you want the whole Berkeley ethos, the Berkeley values of making change in the world.
In this episode, we'll learn what makes SkyDeck different from other accelerator programs, including the likes of Y Combinator, 500 Startups, and Techstars.
We are not a separate entity. We're not a private company. We're not a 501c3 spinoff. We are a Berkeley program.
And in addition to the SkyDeck incubator and accelerator program, SkyDeck has its own venture fund, which is backed by some of the top-tier venture firms in Silicon Valley, including Sequoia, Mayfield, Canvas, and Sierra Ventures.
Our role is to help founders understand what it takes to raise an institutional round here in the Valley, thinking about bold ideas, building the right team. That means approaching investors in the right way at the right time.
As a former PhD visiting scholar at UC Berkeley, SkyDeck is really near and dear to my heart. And that's why I'm so excited about this episode. But let's hear it from Caroline herself, and let's dig right in. And go Bears!
You know it. One, tell a story. One, you tell the whole damn world this is bad territory.
I'm super excited to be joined by Caroline Winnett today, who's the Executive Director at UC Berkeley's Incubator and Accelerator program, SkyDeck. Welcome, Caroline. You ready to take us to the top?
You bet. You bet. That's where we go, straight to the top.
So as I just told you, I have a unique relation to SkyDeck as I was a visiting scholar at UC Berkeley. For the audience, maybe give us the cliff notes of what SkyDeck is really all about.
Sure. Berkeley SkyDeck is UC Berkeley's startup accelerator and incubator. We have about 140 startups in our program at any given time, and we accelerate and incubate. And we have startups both from Berkeley, from UC Berkeley, also from any of the 10 UC campuses. And for our acceleration program, we have startups coming from outside the US who want to come and launch in the US. And we connect all these founders to our extraordinary community of UC Berkeley. And we are a UC Berkeley program. So we are at the heart of Berkeley innovation and Berkeley's desire to find great solutions to solve the world's biggest problems.
You just had your most recent demo days. In the times of Corona, I assume that this was all remote. How did this work, and how did it differ from the usual demo days?
So it worked great. It was on YouTube Live. We had great attendance. It was different, of course, because typically our demo day is in person in the middle of UC Berkeley campus. As far as we know, probably the largest demo day in the Bay Area. We weren't live. We couldn't have the Cal Band live, sadly, but we had the core, which is all of our accelerator track startups pitching their wonderful business ideas for investor consideration.
Let's talk a little bit about you and your background and your journey from being in the founder's shoes to running an incubator and accelerator program. You were an entrepreneur for a decade or two. You started 2 companies. Talk to us a little bit about how that journey has shaped you and how this really adds to your day-to-day experience at SkyDeck.
So I started far more than 2 companies, but 2 of them is what I brag about. And really one of them is the one that I've co-founded and was with in the full ride. The other one I helped co-found, and then I went off to do other things. My big startup ride was a company called NeuroFocus. And it was a bunch of us Cal alums, scientists and engineers, and myself. I'm a Cal MBA. And we teamed up with a neuroscientist who's a professor at Berkeley of neuroscience. And we would put EEG sensors on people's heads, and that would provide insights for companies on how people reacted to their products. It was a fast ride from launch to acquisition in 5 years, from 0 to 25 million in revenue in that same time, and everything that goes along with it. You know, my co-founder and I putting all of our savings, literally every penny, and then going into some personal debt, and all the chips on the table, and this better work. And, fortunately it did. That experience of having gone from a crazy idea to then acquisition, we were acquired by the Nielsen company. I lived that, and I bring that experience, and it really helps me understand my founders, helps me understand where they are, both from a business perspective, but also from a personal perspective, because I know what it's like to just put everything on the table for your startup.
Then in 2014, you joined the SkyDeck program. Today, if you're at the BART station in Berkeley, everybody knows the SkyDeck offices in the tower there. But how were the first days of the SkyDeck program? I assume it wasn't an easy sell for state-owned university system to get into the venture business.
So SkyDeck existed when I was brought in to run the program. So some very enterprising people had done the previous hard work of setting up this program for success the way it was set up. It was a pretty quiet incubator program when I joined. And so when I came on at the end of 14, we wanted to set up an accelerator, which is much harder. It's just much more intensive. You have to have a program, you have to have structure, you have to have a way to coach these startups and get them from point A to point B, figure out how could we fund these startups, right? You can't accelerate a startup unless you give them a nice investment check. So how were we going to do that? We, as UC Berkeley University, could not set up a small seed fund. So we had to get creative. So what we ended up doing is finding a really talented fund manager to launch a dedicated venture fund that would fund all the startups at SkyDeck. That fund, the Berkeley SkyDeck Fund, is our dedicated partner fund. It's a $24.5 million fund, and that fund invests in all the startups in our accelerator track, and the fund managers work closely with us to help those startups grow and launch. And then here's the really fantastic thing about this. The Berkeley SkyDeck Fund and UC Berkeley share equally in the profits of the fund. So that makes us co-equal partners in working with these companies. So we get all private capital, because there's no UC Berkeley capital that went into the fund. It's all private capital by very professional investors, plus all of the resources and energy and the mission of UC Berkeley working together. And it's a beautiful partnership, and it works incredibly well.
Let me double click a little bit on this fund structuring. You mentioned that 50% of the carried interest, the way I understand, goes to UC Berkeley. What about the management fee? That's to cover the fund structure, and that, I assume, is not something that pays for any of the accelerator facilities.
It does, but those funds are due later. But there is some compensation that the fund pays to Berkeley for the fair market value of our services, for the use of our brand name, the Berkeley brand, et cetera, et cetera. So that's all really nicely worked out so that we each share in, the fund returns. UC Berkeley is compensated appropriately, as a public university, and the partnership really works incredibly well. And so now all we have to do is find the next gigantic breakthrough company. And when that company exits, UC Berkeley will receive a portion of those profits, and that will fund education. And so that's a wonderful goal. It's a wonderful mission. And it is a way to get our alumni, our supporters, our advisors, all very excited about helping the companies at SkyDeck.
In terms of the LP base of the fund, it's Sequoia, Mayfield, Canvas, Sierra Ventures backing this 24 million SkyDeck fund. How did this partnership come together? And I assume this comes out of their seed bucket, laying a foundation to then be able to participate in the follow-on rounds.
Right, exactly. When we started the fund, by we, I mean, our fund manager, of course, with cooperation from SkyDeck, we started reaching out to, of course, we wanted really top quality Silicon Valley investors to invest, not just because they're great financial partners, but because we knew with that kind of partnering that we would be looking jointly for great companies. And that when companies graduated from SkyDeck, they would be talking to companies, investors like Sequoia, like Mayfield. We were just delighted and wonderfully thrilled that they were eager to invest. Sequoia was our first investor with our first commitment. And so when we started talking to the other investors, of course, it was great to get this just absolute blue chip list of Silicon Valley investors who have been wonderful partners with us.
Yeah, it's a really impressive list of venerable Silicon Valley firms. Let's talk about the elephant in the room. I guess it's a question you get asked on a daily basis. How does SkyDeck differentiate itself from other accelerator programs, such as the infamous Y Combinator, 500 Startups, Techstars? And then maybe more specifically on the Stanford side, the StartX program.
Right. That's actually a very easy question to answer. The difference is that unlike any other accelerator, and I'll explain exactly how, SkyDeck is Berkeley. We are not a separate entity. We're not a private company. We're not a 501c3 spinoff. We are a Berkeley program. My staff and I report to the Vice Chancellor for Research. So that makes us have a mission and an identity that serves us really, really well. It makes us a mission-driven organization in a way that no other structure or identity could. And that goes down to how we feel, my staff and I, the core staff, how the advisors feel who are donating their time to advise our companies, to the alumni that we call up and say, will you help one of our companies? If they succeed, Berkeley will benefit financially. It is a wonderful circle, expanding and growing circle of mission, excitement to support Berkeley and all of the Berkeley values, which it turns out are very much startup values, right? Find great technologies, change the world with great solutions, get them quickly to solve the world's problems. Don't talk about them and think about them. Let's really make change in the world. And that's all come together in a way that honestly we couldn't have anticipated when we started this. I'd say that's really the core difference. There are some programs that are connected to universities or maybe a spin-off of universities. StartX is an example, and StartX is a great program for Stanford. But being an actual program of Berkeley, which SkyDeck is, I think gives us a whole next level sense of mission that really is extraordinary.
Let's talk a little bit about the cohort profile and the eligibility requirements. So in terms of the cohort profile, you mentioned some stats on the website. Given the proximity to the university system, these are really deep tech verticals that give the startups a technological moat. What would you say is the typical application split in terms of technologies and stage?
The typical stage of the company at SkyDeck is very early. We take companies at the pre-seed stage. They have probably some sort of prototype or demo. They might have some data. We can take them very early. We are fortunate in that our program is extremely competitive. We received, for this next cohort that we're evaluating, 1,800 applications. And this is for about 20 spots. So because of that wonderfully competitive application pool, we can be very selective. So while we're taking early stage companies, we're looking for a company that has some evidence that the startup really is going to be able to do something meaningful with $105,000 that our SkyDeck fund will invest in them. And that 6 months later, when we present them at a demo day, they'll be ready for institutional investment.
Let's say I'm a SaaS founder from Latvia or a fintech founder from the UK. Can I apply or how does it work? Do I have to be a alumni of UC Berkeley, a current student? Do I need to have some staff who are at UC Berkeley? How does it work?
Right. So for the accelerator track, we're looking for companies that either have a UC affiliation. That's Berkeley, of course. We look first and foremost at our Berkeley founders. That is our priority. And for international founders that are located outside the US, we are requiring that when they join the program, they make a meaningful Berkeley connection. So they need to find a co-founder. They need to find a faculty advisor. They need to hire some engineers, perhaps, or some business development people. We are screening for those companies that are looking to come to SkyDeck, not just for our great program, but because of the great program that is a Berkeley program.
Let's talk a little bit about how the acceleration program actually works.
And I even look back to those 6 months, and we accomplished so much just because we were focused on those key milestones that we needed to accomplish by demo day. A contained environment with a support system and a clear target by the end was really, really important.
I see that you have a milestone payment in the middle of the program. How does the day-to-day life at SkyDeck work for the companies?
So it really depends on the company. So we have companies that are all different types of industries. And basically, that milestone, we're just looking for companies that have made meaningful progress, that are participating in the program, and really taking advantage of the resources that we have to offer.
Let's talk about your favorite success stories, the companies, the outliers. I mean, I see there on your website, obviously, from the micromobility scooter wars, we have Lime.
So I love all of our companies. They're all wonderful. A few of them we talk about because they're getting sort of well known publicly, and one of them, of course, is Lime, who came through SkyDeck as a incubator track company some time ago. Because by the time we launched our accelerator track with funding, Lime was actually already quite big and had already raised, I think, about $100 million at that point. So, but they've participated actively. They have some Berkeley co-founders on their team, and of course is founded by a Berkeley alum. So they've been a great partner. We love to brag about them as brilliant minds coming from Berkeley and really being, I think, an emblematic of, hey, world, take a look at UC Berkeley. We really do have an extraordinary crop of talented founders who are coming out of our ecosystem.
Talking about the broader ecosystem, I remember when I was a visiting scholar at Berkeley, I would travel to Sand Hill Road a couple of times, and it took me about 2 hours with the BART and the Caltrain and everything. Do you think that this location advantage that Stanford had is in these days and ages completely eradicated, given that you can raise a Sequoia seed round from Colorado if you have a good Wi-Fi connection just as easily as you can from Stanford main campus? How do you see Berkeley's positioning evolving in these circumstances?
Great question. So the death of Silicon Valley has been greatly exaggerated. It is still, and let me define Silicon Valley. Silicon Valley is really now the Bay Area. Anywhere that is within 1 to 2 hour drive radius, that depends on traffic when we used to drive before COVID. And there's still nothing like the concentration of startup expertise, of investors, of vendors, law firms, accountants, et cetera, that understand how to tailor their services to startups. There's nothing like the concentration that we have in Silicon Valley anywhere else in the world. No other place comes close. Now, that said, the other tech hotspots around the world are growing and interesting things are happening. And I think, over the years, we will see other Silicon Valley-like places emerge that maybe have specific industry focuses, right? Like obviously in China, in Shenzhen, there's manufacturing going on there for startups, huge center there. We have financial services startup ecosystem in London, many other places around the world that we got to identify. COVID has accelerated this process. We see partners at Silicon Valley firms having Zooms with startups everywhere. So I would say that the center of gravity of the startup world is still indisputably Silicon Valley, but it is democratizing a bit as the world disperses. COVID makes us more comfortable doing everything remotely.
Let's talk a little bit about how you see the future of SkyDeck. So in the ideal world, would you see the SkyDeck fund move into later and later follow-on rounds, or do you think this is the ideal sweet spot, the Goldilocks zone, if you like? And how do you see your personal future at SkyDeck building out this program further?
We see for the foreseeable future that we will continue to focus on this accelerator stage fund. So SkyDeck Fund 1 and then our subsequent Fund 2, which will begin in a year or two when we're done with Fund 1. We'll continue to focus on the accelerator stage. The fund does make some follow-on investments in subsequent rounds. And so there will be more capital to do that when we raise a larger Fund 2. The long-term goal for Berkeley is to have several partner funds like the Berkeley SkyDeck Fund that invest in various stages and share carry with the campus. And whether that's other offshoots of the SkyDeck Fund or other funds we partner with is TBD. But that's our game plan. Myself personally, I absolutely love what I'm doing. It's just the most fun I've ever had. I love feeling like when I get up in the morning, I'm not only helping founders achieve their visions and their dreams, but I'm helping UC Berkeley. And as a Berkeley alum myself, the daughter of Berkeley alums, everybody in my family, children at Berkeley, I'm as blue and gold as they come, right? It really is personally very satisfying for me to do something that provides benefit to the campus, not just as an exciting program that gets all of our founders excited, but also can really meaningfully support the campus for the future.
That's so wonderful. So Caroline, this is a good wrap up. Thank you so much for taking the time and talking to us about SkyDeck.
It's been great speaking with you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
So we're on our own moonshot trajectory. Join us.